Good morning, everybody. Edmentum, Illinois. We are here with another edition of Edmentum, Illinois Presents. It's Friday. We're in the middle of November. It's hard to believe already. And we are so very pleased to have Lisa Westman with us this week. I'm sure that you guys already know Lisa. She is a published author. She has a book titled Student-Driven Differentiation, and her most recent book, Teaching with Empathy, actually got her up to #1 on Amazon as far as bestsellers. We're happy to have Lisa with you, but she's a frequent contributor to Edutopia, EdWeek, ASCD, blog post. LisaWestman.com is her website. She's also a great follow on Twitter at Lisa_Westman. Lisa, how are you today?
I'm good, Jason. Thanks for having me.
You got it. It's our pleasure. And this week we're going to do the What You Readin' segment. So Lisa, we're going to go ahead and get it started. What you reading?
I am reading a book called The Human Element by Lauren Nordgren and David Schoenthal. And actually an instructional coach that I work with in one of the districts that's my clients sent the whole team, including me, an email saying, you got to listen to this podcast. They're interviewing this author and it's like everything we're talking about. And so I listened to it and I was like, this is amazing. And so I bought the book and so good. And it has nothing to do with education. It's about the business world, but so much of what's in the book applies to education. So the main premise is there's two different ways to motivate people, for lack of a better term, again, to either buy a product or buy into an idea, whatever. There's fuel and there's friction. And fuel is what we tend to do, like all of the compelling reasons why you might want to do something. And in the book, what the premise is most people understand those compelling reasons and agree with them. That isn't necessarily the reason why they aren't buying into the idea or purchasing the product. It's because we really need to be focusing on the friction and removing the friction. And so, the book and the podcast give lots of different examples. And one example is, and it can be, these are such simple things, but they talk about the first cake mix that people or whatever company came out with it. It was just, here's the cake mix, add water. And people weren't buying it. Why weren't people buying it? Because there's some type of like pride and the way when we bake it like sends our love. And so it didn't feel like baking with just a mix and water sent that love. And so I think it was Betty Crocker, but don't quote me on that. They changed it. So it wasn't just add water, but it was water and 2 eggs. Like you actually crack the eggs and you have to mix it. And sales went up like exponentially because it removed that friction of people don't feel that this is sending that love. And so, and then there's, lots of different examples, but thinking about in education, there's so much talk of like initiatives and buy-in and how do we get, teachers to do this? How do we get students to do this? How do we get parents to do this? And so I've just been like, my head's been going like, what's the friction? How do we remove that friction? So it's a great read.
I love it. Lisa, can you maybe think of a specific example where a district saw some friction and removed it in order to get some buy-in?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Meredith. And one of a different client that I work with, they, as most districts, they've received additional funding this year, due to the pandemic environment or post-pandemic environment that we're in. And they really wanted to use some of those funds to hire interventionists. They wanted to hire 4 interventionists. They were really struggling to find, even get applicants. And what they realized when they started to ask around, like there were some teachers in the community or nearby suburbs that they knew had taught in the past and weren't applying. And they reached out to them. And these teachers said, I'd love to come back, but I still want to be able to take my kids to school in the morning and pick them up in the afternoon. And so the hours of 8 to 3:30 aren't working for me. And so that friction was the hours, and they were being hired for interventionists. So the district said, what if we made it from 9 to 2? We'll do all of our interventions during that 9 to 2. And they got all of these applicants. They hired 4 awesome people. And it was just, again, removing, not that people didn't want that job, not that people didn't think that the interventions are important. It was just the hours of the job.
Again, just something really that ended up being a fairly simple fix.
Exactly. Yeah. So I feel like, what are all those other ways that we can do that with all the million things that we try to do?
Yeah, and Lisa, that brings me to my next question would just be, as you've read the book and you've thought about it and the concepts and the examples that were presented, maybe what's maybe a piece of advice that you could give to leaders in education out there, whether it's on the fuel side or it's on the friction side, to maybe use, or maybe to reframe some of their conversations or their pitches to their employees, to their stakeholders, regarding the current state of education?
Yeah, so that's another good question, Jason. I think, the advice I would give is, when you start to get pushback, right, resistance, whatever that is, look for those common threads. What are those themes? What are people saying, right? And you got to weed out like all the pieces that don't make sense. But sometimes you'll hear things like, I think in PLCs, I'll hear a lot of, we don't have time to put all the data in. And so then we're not prepared for that PLC. And so the friction is not, we don't believe in looking at the data. We don't believe in, working collaboratively to grow all of our students. It's the time. And then what tool do we have, right? We're trying to do this. And so the friction piece, it's removing that friction, but a lot of, what the authors talk about is the path of least resistance. So if we can find a way, and there's lots of different ways you could do that, right? To help the teachers with those pieces, give them a tool or give them human capital, whatever that is, rather than adding the fuel, which is really what we do. A lot of times we'll even say, well, you have that Wednesday time from 1 to 2. That's when you're putting your data in, or, we add fuel. And the other main point in the book is, the more fuel you add when you aren't getting the results, the less likely long-term you're going to see those results. It becomes harder to remove those frictions if you've added too much fuel. And so I think it's thought-provoking. So long answer to your short question, listen to those themes, and instead of adding fuel, telling people why they should, try and think about what could we do to make this easier for people.
That is really great advice. And I've been witness to those situations where the fuel just gets piled on, and then people just kind of tune out eventually because they just feel so overwhelmed. So yeah,
Right.
Thank you. That's really, really good advice. Thank you for spending a few minutes of your time with us today, Lisa. Again, everyone, it's Lisa Westman, and she was talking about a book called The Human Element. I also encourage you to check out her new book called Teaching with Empathy. And you can also follow her, as Jason said, on Twitter at Lisa Westman.
Lisa
No.
underscore.
Can't read my scribbles. At Lisa _Westman. So thank you, Lisa. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and same to all of our listeners.
Yes. Bye.